Hello everyone! It has been a while since you have seen my face on camera. So yeah, it's been a while since I filmed a video like this. You may have noticed my last few videos, I've just been recording voiceover and putting video clips on top of it. Frankly, it was just a refreshing change for me to not have to film myself and just record voiceover and not have to go through this whole filming process. While the scripting process for those types of videos is a little bit more intensive, the actual video making process for those videos is less of a faff in some ways. And also just with my life going a little bit crazy in the last couple months, filming at a certain time of day, having to schedule it, it got to be a bit of a pain. So I've taken a little break from video making, but now I am back. And to ease myself back into video making, I thought I would do something that is relatively nice and easy to me, and that is just to do a regular book tag. Today I am doing the Mid-Year Freakout Book Tag, which is a great opportunity for me to recap what I have been reading this year, what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy so much. After all, a lot of people come to this channel for the booktube content, so let's get right to it. Let's talk about some books. The first question is the best book you've read so far in 2021. There are quite a few contenders here, but the first book that I absolutely have to mention is 魔道祖师. This is a Chinese web novel by the author Mo Xiangtong-xiu. I'm pretty sure I messed up the tones on that. This is a fantasy novel set in a world run by Taoist cultivators. The closest parallel I can find in Western fantasy is probably magicians or wizards. There is a lot of elitism in this world and a lot of set conventions. The main character of this story is Hui Wuxian, and through a set of circumstances, he finds himself deviating from the conventional path of cultivation and setting on a more demonic path. A lot of the story is about how he rises to power and then eventually falls from grace and then is able to eventually redeem himself again. The central relationship in the story is between him and another cultivator called Lan Wangji. Lan Wangji is a more by-the-books cultivator. So like many other people, I came to the book because of the wonderful series adaptation of this book, The Untamed. That show basically set all my standards for all future C-drama watching and general Asian drama consumption. So I loved the show, and so I decided to give the book a shot, and it did not disappoint. I won't go too much into the details of how the adaptation changed from the source material. I think I'm gonna do a much more in-depth video about that. But I did love that the book added a lot more layers onto the world. The world building is much more rich. A lot of things that are maybe left off in the show were not really explained. They are elaborated on immensely in the book, and that was great for understanding what happened in the story. And of course, the show is not explicit about the romance between the two central characters, and having that actually be realized in the book was definitely really rewarding. So keep in mind, this novel is not out in print in English. There is no official English translation for this novel. There are a lot of fan translations out there with people just putting out translations on their blogs or websites. I will link the most widely read translation below, and it's also complete, so you can just read it in its entirety now. Also, this novel is a time investment. It can be a little bit deceptive if you're just reading it on a series of web pages, but it is very long. So if this was out in print, it would be a tome, so keep that in mind. But I love this novel. I think it was the most definitive read of this first half of the year. The second book, or rather books, I want to talk about are the second and third books of the Winter Nights trilogy. The second book is Girl in the Tower, and the third one is Winter of the Witch. This series by Catherine Arden is set in medieval Russia, and the main character, Vasya, is a girl who grows up in the countryside. She has the gift of seeing and being able to commune with local spirits, like house spirits and animal spirits and spirits who reside in nature. She doesn't conform well to her community, and a lot of the conflict of the story comes from her being an odd one out. And then of course she becomes a pawn of a power struggle between two conflicting deities. I really love the atmosphere of this series. It was very, I use this word a ton. It was very fairy tale-like. The magic of this story feels so grounded in reality and yet takes you to all these fantastical places. And I felt like each volume of this series leaned into that more and more, introducing us to new deities and new spirits and taking us to different dimensional planes. So if you love historical fantasy, I would definitely recommend this one. The third book I want to mention is Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. Silver in the Wood is a novella, and it deals with a man who lives in a forest on a big estate. And as we read the novel, the story invites us to put together the pieces about his history with this forest and with the land and how he came to be in his situation. I thought this story was one of the most interesting takes on the Green Man I had ever read. It was also probably one of the most deliciously pagan works I had ever read. Just once in a while you find a work that really understands pagan ideas and really leans into them and takes them to interesting places, and this novella really took it there. And apparently there is a sequel, so I am really looking forward to reading that. The next question is the best sequel you've read so far in 2021. Again, I have to mention books 2 and 3 in the Winter Nights trilogy, Girl in the Tower and Winter of the Witch. And the other sequel I have to mention is Fortress Vader, which is the last volume in Charles Soule's run of the Vader comic series. I think it was from 2017 or 2018. This series deals with Darth Vader right after he's become Darth Vader, like put on the suit and shed his Anakin Skywalker identity. But he's still quite green. He's not completely the Darth Vader that we know from the original series in Star Wars. He still has hopes of bringing his wife Padme back to life, and this particular volume deals with the precise process by which he thinks he can achieve this. This is a really cool volume in the series because we get to see a lot of interesting aspects of the world. We get to see how exactly Vader gets his fortress, hence Fortress Vader. It's peppered with a little bit of humor here and there, but overall it's a very heartbreaking volume because, of course, we know he's not going to get his wife back. I just really love it when the Vader comics delve into his emotional journey. I love seeing Vader kick ass and everything, but this is a deeply conflicted character who's gone through so much pain and trauma and takes it out in these incredibly villainous ways. And I love it when we can actually explore what's going on in his head. Like, I'm okay with stories where Vader just goes on a bunch of villainous antics and kills a lot of people, but to me those are not the most interesting aspects of Darth Vader, so I am really glad when I read the graphic novels where he really does go through these emotional journeys. The third question is new releases you haven't read but want to. I am really not up to date with a lot of new releases, but I know one that has caught my eye is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nai Vo. I've heard a lot of people say good things about it. I am always down to read more Asian authored works. The other book is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I think that's how you say that. I think it's supposed to be a work of dark academia, and I think there's a ton of buzz around it at my school at the moment because it takes place at my school. I think the author is also an alum of my school, but there's a lot of buzz around it online and a lot of buzz around it around where I live, so definitely looking forward to this one. Number 4 is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. For me, that would probably be Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, which would be the third book in her Greenbone saga. I think it's coming out in November of this year. No doubt people are gonna get arcs of it earlier than that. But of course, before I read that book, I have to read Jade War, which is the second book in that series. So I do need to get on that. Number 5 is The Biggest Disappointment. Again, I have a few books that I want to mention here. The first book is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. So this book is supposed to be set in a Victorian era-like world, and we start in a country that is basically England, even though all the countries basically have different names. The main character who is narrating is called Lady Trent, but she starts out under a different name in the book. And her dream is to observe and study dragons in other other countries and lands. And in this world, dragons are basically exotic animals that you can just go and observe and study and dissect. So like any typical Victorian young woman, the main character is expected to get married and settle down, but through her husband she is actually able to go on an expedition to another country to actually observe a particular type of dragon. Now the concept of this book is amazing. A Victorian setting, dragons, what more could I want? On paper, this book is precisely the sort of thing that I would like. But overall, this book ended up really failing in execution for me, because the story promises you dragons, right? You're going to observe dragons and get to know dragons, but there's not a lot of dragons in this book. Like, we have sketches of dragons and we know about different types of dragons, but a lot of times when we get to meet dragons, they're already dead or getting ready to be dissected. And even the last plot twist of the story, it didn't end up being about dragons at all. It was more about the humans of the story. In and of itself, having a big human element isn't bad. It's just that it's not balanced out by interesting dragon scenes. So dragons are introduced, but they don't pay off in a way that is very satisfying. Also, I found the setup of the world really confusing. Like, you have England and what is essentially Eastern Europe or Russia, but they're under different names, so you just end up kind of confused about what country you're in or what sort of culture our characters are stepping into. I found myself just really disoriented a lot of the time when I was reading this book. I would have rather this book just stuck to names from our world, countries from our world, cultures from our world, because then it would have helped the book feel rooted in reality, which was the point anyway. No shade here to Marie Brennan at all. I think she's a lovely individual. I moderated a panel with her on it, and I think she's a very thoughtful, insightful individual. I just didn't particularly enjoy this work by her. And of course, I would love to explore other works of hers in the future. Another book I want to mention is Witches, Sluts, Feminists by Kristen Soleil. This is a book I read in a book club, and it had been recommended highly by the Fat Feminist Witch, whose podcast I love. This book attempts to discuss the witch archetype and how it has evolved over history and in media. The premise is that the archetypes of the witch and the slut have been more labels for people who are ostracized from society, particularly women. They've been used to suppress female sexuality or to shame powerful women who patriarchal societies see as threats. So on the surface, what this book is trying to do is very positive. It's trying to promote sex positivity and also to talk about how the witch archetype is changing and being reappropriated by witches, and is also trying to talk about how witches are now symbols of female power. Unfortunately, as much as I wanted to like this book, this really failed in my expectations. I really don't think this book is as smart or as revolutionary as the author seems to think it is. I didn't think I was learning anything new or particularly mind-blowing in the course of this book. I didn't feel any more enlightened about the archetype of the witch than I already was, so maybe this book was more for beginners in this subject, but I've already been steeped in this conversation for a few years now, so it was really nothing special. I think what really rubbed me the wrong way about this book was how this book lacked such nuance when discussing certain political figures like the suffragettes or Hillary Clinton. Like, this author put these women on pedestals, like elevated them, almost deifying them, without any nuanced scrutiny of these people's legacies. She talks so much about the suffragette movement and how they were very witchy in their own way, but a lot of these women, they were virulent racists. A lot of the foundation of their feminism was based on racism. A lot of these women were advocating advocating for the right to vote because they did not like the fact that black men had more of a right to vote than white women did. In fact, a lot of white suffragettes ended up falling in with the KKK later on. So the fact that this was never addressed, just brushed under the rug, just really rubbed me the wrong way. Also, there was a whole chapter on Hillary Clinton that really drove me up the wall. This chapter's thesis statement was that Hillary Clinton wasn't elected president back in 2016 because America wasn't ready for a female president. America felt threatened by her. It was all patriarchy and sexism that kept Hillary Clinton out of the White House. I can tell you right now that that is complete BS, and I am not a Trump fan by any measure. I know people have all kinds of feelings about Hillary Clinton, and no doubt she did go very high for a woman in politics, but she's also very well known for corruption. She's also very well known for slut-shaming the women her husband had affairs with, which is such an antithesis to what this book seems to stand for. I literally couldn't believe what I was reading when I read this chapter. It was like, oh, look at Hillary Clinton, this put-upon woman who is smart and powerful and didn't deserve anything that happened to her. No matter how you feel about Hillary Clinton, she does not deserve to be deified. No politician deserves to be put on a pedestal like that. Just because a powerful figure is a woman doesn't mean that she's completely good, that she's the answer to all of a nation's problems. Like, history is filled with corrupt women. Look at Margaret Thatcher. She was a woman, but she was no feminist icon. Oh, okay. So that was Witches, Sluts, Feminists. Another disappointing read I want to mention is Zeus is a Dick by Susie Duncan. This was another witchy book club read that I really hated. This was an attempt at a humorous take on Greek mythology, and I'm not against reads like this. If the humor is right, I can really get behind it. Unfortunately, this book was the most tedious and tiresome thing I had ever read. I honestly would have DNF'd this book if I was not reading it for a book club. The entire reading experience was like pulling teeth. I really did not get on with the humor of this book. It was so chatty in a way that was really obnoxious. The pop culture references that the author used, they kept disrupting the continuity of the world. What is it? At the beginning of the world, Gaia sits her Titan son down at a cafe. All these pop culture references to Adele and James Blunt, and seriously, these are the sorts of things that are going to make this book age very fast. Also, the handling of sexual assault in this book is absolutely god-awful. And it was like, oh, and the sexual assault happened, and that was bad. Oh dear. And back to our rollicking adventure. I don't know if it's because I was exposed to Greek myths a lot when I was in school and studied classics, but I found this absolutely intolerable. I would not introduce this to anyone as an introduction to Greek myths. I said this in my review on Goodreads, but I think this book was really an excuse to say the word dick a lot. And if you really want a good humorous take on Greek myths and myths in general, I would highly recommend the Myths and Legends podcast by Jason Weiser. At least that podcast doesn't casually brush off sexual assault. Next question is the biggest surprise, and I would say unequivocally Silver in the Wood by Emily Tish. I went in expecting some simple, woodsy, fantastical fun, and it turned out to be one of the best pagan books I have read this year, so that was amazing. Next question is favorite new author, either a debut or new to you, and that is Emily Tish. I'm really looking forward to reading more of her books after Silver in the Wood. I think Emily Tish actually went to my school as well, so yeah, always going to support another alum. The next question is newest fictional crush, and that has to be 蓝忘机 from 魔道祖师 or from The Untamed. So a lot of people who know me would be like, why didn't you pick Wei Wuxian? And I'm like, well, I relate to Wei Wuxian, but if I were with him, I think he would drive me crazy. So clearly his counterpart, 蓝忘机 would be better for me. And 蓝忘机 is amazing as a romantic partner. He is caring, he is considerate, he will fight 33 members of his own clan just to protect you, even though you might have killed lots of people. And really, there is nothing more a girl could want from a romantic partner. The next question is newest favorite character, and of course, I'm going to say Wei Wuxian from 魔道祖师/ The Untamed. This character is one of the biggest game changers for me in fiction. I think he is one of the best portrayals of male witches in fiction and of witches in general. I've mentioned this before, but it's been so important to me as someone in the Chinese diaspora to see another Chinese witch. Wei Wuxian is a witch. I am not taking questions at this time. He is absolutely one of the witchiest characters I've ever seen. Where do you even begin with a character like this? He is so dynamic. He is so smart and innovative. Some of my favorite scenes with him are where he's just working through cases. He's just using his skills of deduction to figure things out. He's also definitely an example of a chaotic good character. He is heroic at heart, but the way he goes about things are sometimes really chaotic and sometimes really not tactful. I have not related to a character so much in years and years and years. I actually want to make a video all about him and analyzing his character, so I'll probably use that space to go into detail. This character is so revolutionary, I think, in Chinese fiction, and also just so meaningful for me. I felt so seen by this character, and that is why he is my new favorite character, perhaps of all time. The next question is a book that made you cry. So I can't say I cried reading very many of the books that I read in the year so far. I will say a few did make me very emotional, and I'll mention one in particular. The first volume of the Vader 2020 run by Greg Pak made me particularly emotional. This comic series covers events between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It starts off right after Vader has confronted Luke in Empire Strikes Back and has now let him go. Now he's on a journey to avenge himself on people who hid the existence of his son from him, and in the process he revisits Naboo and reflects on his relationship with Padme and how they ended things. The throwbacks to the prequels in this volume were just top-notch. The parallels used, amazing. I've said before that I love it when the comics bring Vader on an emotional journey and really explore how he's processing all of this new information. And this volume was really effective at showing how Vader, in his heart of hearts, has these emotional connections that he still treasures and really craves ultimately, which is why he wants to connect so much with his son. The subsequent volumes of this series I feel like haven't really lived up to this first volume, but I think this first volume hits particularly hard when it deals with Vader's psychology as he grapples with his desires for connections and emotions, and also grapples with the fact that his master betrayed him and has deceived him for years. So that's just incredibly interesting stuff. Anything that sells Darth Vader to me as a tragic character who craves intimacy, I will take it. The next question is a book that made you happy. I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but of course that book would be 魔道祖师. It's funny that a book that delves into so many painful experiences and has so much gore could be also a comfort read for me, but I really did get so much joy out of reading this book. I really loved everything from the magic to the world building and also the dynamics between all of the characters, and of course being able to be reintroduced to my favorite fictional characters all over again. So of course this book made me happy. It was an epic comfort read. The next question is the most beautiful book you have bought this year or has been gifted to you. First book is The Crooked Mask by Rachel Burge. This is the sequel to The Twisted Tree, a book which I also can't stop talking about on this channel. So in the first book, The Twisted Tree, the main character, Martha, discovers she has a new ability to sense people's feelings and read their intentions through their clothing after she has an accident. And that book covered her journey of traveling to Norway to get answers about her identity and her abilities. And this is the sequel, which I am very excited about. So this world has a lot of Norse mythology woven into it, and there is still this Algi's rune on the spine here. But overall, the aesthetic of this book is a bit different from the Twisted Tree. And apparently there is a circus that is very central to this story, so I'd be interested to see how Norse mythology is woven into that environment. The next book is a book I have already read this year, and this is How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories. This is sort of a companion to the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I think that series is one of my favorite book series about fairies of all time. This book is a series of stories about Cardan, who is the titular cruel prince of the first volume of that series. The cover is lovely, and there are some amazing end papers. The artist is Ravina Tsai, and she always does these amazing illustrations. I love a lot of the things she does. Whenever she illustrates a book, I always have to look through it because her artwork is always so, it's penciled in, so it looks sparse and yet it's very detailed and fantastical at the same time. The last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Oh, so many. I am not really making headway in my 2021 TBR. The books I'm naming here, it's by no means a comprehensive list, but I'll give the highlights. The first one is definitely Jade War by Fonda Lee, which is the second book in the Greenbone saga, and I have to read this book before Jade Legacy comes out, of course. Another book I really have to read is City of Heavenly Fire by Cassie Clare, and of course this is the last book in the Mortal Instruments series. I just need to get on with it and finish this series. I feel like the fact that I've not finished this series is holding me back from doing so much more reading in the Shadowhunters universe. I know I don't necessarily have to finish the series for a lot of other books that have recently come out, but it would still be nice. It would still be a sense of completion on my part. I feel like so much of your understanding of the rest of the Shadowhunters universe comes from this series, so I really need to finish it. Another book is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. She, of course, wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which was, I think, my favorite book I read in 2020. Lots of people online have loved it. Lots of people whose opinions I trust have loved it. And it's also not too long, so I have no excuse to not read this. And the last set of books I'll mention are the Thrawn trilogy in the Star Wars Legends universe. I had told myself this year that I was going to read more in the Star Wars Legends universe, and of course the most important series in the Legends universe is the Thrawn trilogy. I've said it before, but I was pretty disenchanted with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, so I wanted to be able to reset my headcanon and dive into Legends. I would say those four are my staple goals for the rest of the year, and if I don't get to anything else in my 2021 TBR, it is what it is. So that was the Mid-Year Freakout book tag. I hope you enjoyed this small dose of book content. Let me know down below what books you have loved this year. What books have you hated this year so far? Remember to like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram, and I will see you in my next video.